Your body is
Sure.
dying. The cells in your body are dying every step you take. You have to be there and you have to understand how hard it is.
When you get to the summit, I mean, when you're on that
Sure.
altitude, you're gonna lose most of your memory cells.
People think that if they're fit, they can go summit Everest. And that's not always true. Sometimes the body just will shut down, even if you're the most fit person in the world.
You need a certain mentality to summit Everest, but that same mentality can get you killed. Today, we're joined by Corinne Richardson and Pem Sherpa. And Corinne recently wrote a book about Pem, who was a Sherpa living in Nepal. In the story, Pem is trying to break the cycle of poverty and abuse that he was born into. And in order to do that, Pem will have to summon the resilience, courage, and resolve to do what others dream of, which is summiting Mount Everest. And what I like about this is that, most mountaineering stories are based on the folks that are forking over hundreds of thousands of dollars and, flying on helicopters and stuff to climb the mountain. But this story is actually based upon the rare point of view of the Sherpa who aids the climbers to get up to the summit. So today we're going to dive into a little bit of that miraculous story with Corinne, and Pem. So welcome to the podcast, guys.
Thank you for having us.
You bet. So I guess, and like I said, this is the first time I've had two people on at once, so you guys can kind of, since Corinne, you wrote the story, but Pem, you lived the story. So however you guys want to answer this, you can go ahead. But really, the first question that I want to ask is, what is the role of a Sherpa on the mountain, specifically in a place like Mount Everest? Because I think when people are tuning in and they're listening to this, they might not know exactly what that is or exactly every single one of the roles that you guys might do up there. So what is the actual role of the Sherpa?
Well, the actual role of the Sherpas will be, I mean, there are lots of different categories of Sherpa on Everest. Like in general, there is a kitchen staff, the cook staff, the dishwasher, the one that go collect drinking water for the team, and then the leaders, and then there is a one that carry load every day back and forth to the different camp and set up a camp. And there is another set of Sherpas that probably walk with the client and show them a trail how to do it. So it's in a generally one expedition, there will be lots of different categorized members of the workers. Yeah. But the one technically we call Sherpa is that one those who actually set up all these different camps and take client all the way to the summit. And generally all the Sherpas don't get to go to the summit because it's the company or agency that whoever organized, they have to give the permission to go to the summit. And in order to do that, you have to be strong enough or previously summited Everest. And so these are the things kind of required so that they make sure that you will be able to get to the summit with their client. And most of the time when they take the expedition, they will say, well, I have a 10-time Everest summiter, I have a 5-time Everest summiter. So that's how people kind of getting into interest to come with their agency and things like that. So, but overall Sherpas are the one that kind of, working in the background to set up and do all the logistic and fixing all the ropes and things like that. And most of the time, even your paying client go with you, don't really know what really Sherpas are doing out there because their schedule is going differently. Yeah.
What do you guys have is there any kind of how would I phrase this question? What is do other people when Americans, I guess, come over, I guess specifically Americans or Europeans or whoever's climbing over there, what is the role that they think the Sherpa actually plays? Like when they're on the mountain, does their perspective of you guys start to change, do you feel like? Or how does that kind of work?
Well, most of the climbers who come over there, they are kind of like seasonal climbers. They come back and again, most of them, and they know what Sherpas are really doing. But if someone really just sign up the expedition first time and they're coming over there, they might not know what Sherpas will really do, whether they're gonna just carry a load and walk with them or they're gonna set up all these things. So it's technically for them it's need a almost like whole expedition to learn what Sherpa really did or
Sure.
going to do. And some of the time they couldn't even figure out because they don't really work together, right? The Sherpas are working way ahead of the team and set up all this camp and everything, and then members are just kind of following along with the direction of their team leader, and then they don't really get to see Sherpas at all.
What's always kind of amazed me about that is that, I mean, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong with this, but can somebody that's relatively inexperienced with mountaineering, would they be able to climb something like Everest because they have so much of this help?
Uh, well, I mean, nowadays they do because you can point out all this list of the different climbers that climb Everest. I mean, some of them you wouldn't believe at all, like how possibly they climbed Everest. And
Right.
I think it's all because of the help from Sherpas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any comment on that, Corinne? Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that um, when Pam and I were working through this story, one of the things we realized is that people who are paying to climb, they really expect the Sherpa to keep them safe, and that's one interesting dynamic because they want to get to the top, and sometimes they ignore the Sherpa's advice. Like, you're not ready. The weather's not correct. The weather window isn't here right now, and they get summit fever and they just want to go up. So it becomes an interesting dynamic of at what point does the Sherpa um, you know go, go forward based on their own knowledge versus what the client wants. So there's an added jeopardy for the risk and safety of the Sherpas as well.
Absolutely, because I would imagine that, especially somebody that's inexperienced that goes to the mountain, isn't familiar with maybe the signs of the mountain that are dangerous or things like this, and then the Sherpa's probably telling them, "Hey, I don't think we should go. Weather's coming in, avalanche conditions, whatever." And I would assume that they might have a proclivity of ignoring some of that, is what I kind of hear you saying, and say, "Hey, I paid X amount of money for this. I want to reach the top." Unfortunately, does the Sherpa have to go with them in that case typically, or how does that dynamic work?
Well, there are team leaders that really kind of like play the role who should go and who should not go, but at the same time, the Sherpas are the one with the client on a sport. Like most of the time, the team leader will stay at the base camp and communicate with all these problems, but then on the sport, like up on a camp 4 or camp 3, the Sherpas and clients are struggling to make a decision whether they go up or come down. But it's a kind of sad part is some of these wealthy climbers comes over there and then show huge dream for Sherpas. I mean, I do have lots of friends and lots of people help me to get here and all these things, and there are lots of people who does help what they said, but there are some climbers that comes and say, okay, if we able to summit Mount Everest, we're gonna go to US, we're gonna do this, we're gonna get all this sponsorship and all these things, and they kind of like bribe Sherpa in a way that okay, you have to like die to take me to the summit, okay?
Right.
Then we'll do these things, and then Sherpa kind of encourage themselves to push their life in danger and trying to make that summit push.
Yeah.
And that's some of the accidents might happen that time as well because they both wants to really push and make it that things happen so they will have a bright future.
And I'm sure there's countless stories of deaths on Everest where that was the case. And I'm
Right?
sure you
Yeah.
guys, yeah, probably maybe have known people or, have been familiar with that on the mountain as well.
Right.
And
And
there's
some of
even
the
this.
time, yeah.
Go ahead,
Go
Pam.
ahead.
I
Yeah,
was going
some
to
of the
say.
time people argue because they paid so much money and they don't want to go back, and it's hard to leave them there.
I
Corinne,
was,
what were
I
you
was
saying?
going to add that there's a scene in Beyond Everest where Moni was trying to be the first Nuwari woman to summit Everest, and she had one competitor, and her competitor was a much faster climber than Moni was, and and so when Pem and Moni and their other teammate Kami were getting closer to the top, they actually passed her, but I think she had an asthma attack and couldn't breathe, and she was arguing with her Sherpa to take her up, keep going, take her up, and the Sherpa finally convinced her to go back down, and it saved her life.
Saved her life.
Mhm.
Sherpas, yeah. Not only are Sherpas essentially, mountain guides, but they're also, the voice of reason for some of these climbers. I would imagine at a lot of points too. So, yeah, I hope hopefully
Especially,
that kind of gives the audience a little overview of a Sherpa. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, and Chad also, um, they're the voice of reason at that altitude, because your mind just
Totally.
doesn't work at those altitudes like it normally does. It's just even at Gorkshep or Everest Base Camp. There were times when our minds were not clear, and Pem would say, "Ah, no, this is what's
Really.
happening." You just get a little bit of altitude sickness, and you really can't see it and experience it for yourself, and you need a
Yeah.
witness like a Sherpa to say, "Ah, here's what's going on. Let's go down."
Totally. Totally. Wow. Okay. Awesome. Fantastic. So, Corinne, so you had to obviously travel to Nepal at some points to, kind of get some, either visit Pem or get some, just kind of immerse yourself in that culture of the Nepalese. Now, I've never been to Nepal. How would you describe it to somebody that is coming from the U.S. and flies to Nepal for the first time? Like, what could they expect? What is the culture like over there?
Well, it's a really unique culture. I went to Nepal from China, which is not very far away, right? As the crow flies. Um, and the difference was enormous. The people in Nepal are
Interesting.
just so generous and caring, despite living a really hard life. I mean, there's alcoholism, there's poverty, there's lack of medical services, lack of jobs, and yet they have this element of joy. And I was always
Mm,
curious about that. Like, how do
yeah.
you have that? Is it Buddhism? Is it an innate, something innate in many of these individuals that I met? So that was joyful. And I think the other part that, in visiting Pem's village, just to see how simply people live, and there's no cars, there's no traffic, that you walk everywhere. And the sound is so different. It's just so quiet and peaceful, and you understand and feel the rhythms of the village and
Mm-hmm.
Nepal. Now, Kathmandu is a different story. Of course, often fly into Kathmandu, and it's a big, noisy city, and but still, people are just enormously kind. I remember walking up the steps above Namche, which is the gateway to Everest, and the locals would, if they saw a butterfly or a fly on the steps, they would pick it up and put it up on the wall to
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to keep it safe from all the trekkers and the school kids. So that was remarkable. And Pem also set me up to teach at a elementary school in Namche, and that was an incredible cultural experience to see how education works, what the system is like. The classes were all taught in English, and they had a Nepali language class a little bit later in the day. So that was really interesting to see the differences in how Nepal was trying to use this trekking and climbing industry as a means of educating their kids and getting them to know English so they could have some jobs in that
Wow.
tourism industry. And I would say, and then the food was just incredible. The temples and the colors of the flowers and all the rituals, just many many rituals. Pem took me to a funeral rite, and that was really beautiful ceremony. So it was just this very colorful, and you often come back feeling like, wow, I need to get rid of all my stuff because
Yeah.
I need to shed all this stuff and live a simpler life.
Totally. Now, how? And I was just gonna say, you probably felt like you didn't even want to come back in some ways, right? Like how when you did eventually come back into the states, did that take a little bit? the what how I'm trying to frame this question is when I go on a like a long through hike or something, I always say that the it's purport if I was on a 2 week through hike, when I come home, I usually am more grateful for things for about 2 weeks. It's about a 1-to-1
Mm-hmm.
proportionate there. Did you kind of get that when you came back into the States? Did you bring in some of that culture with you? And how long did that last? Or is there any specific examples that you know you've kind of taken away from that?
Yeah, it's a good question. It took months to reacclimatize to
Right.
America, and just the busyness and the, what matters, those questions about what's really important here, what's all the busyness in my life that I can let go of. And one of the things that I brought back with me through my work with Pem, and the Searings Fund, who are trying to help educate girls, is that I sponsored two girls, and one is in Nepal right now in college, and the other one just started here at MSU in Bozeman. And so I feel like it's still part of my life because she's living here now, and I'm
Awesome.
still learning more about the Nepali culture, especially for women. And so the idea of continuing to give back to something that feels important
Yeah.
has stayed with me.
And it probably didn't hurt that you were writing a story about Pem too, who's living there as well.
Exactly, right.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
So I guess yeah. So Pem, can you tell me what was your early life like, and what kind of ended up shaping you to be a this resilient person that's taking on a lot of these obstacles that will come. We'll talk about a little bit more here in a bit, but what kind of shaped some of that resiliency? Do you feel like?
Well, I grew up in a like village, and it's pretty simple there. There's not much happening. We mostly wake up in the morning and go to like a field and work and take care of a few cows and chicken, and then go collect drinking water because it's not nearby the town, so we have to walk like 15-20 minutes to get a drinking water, and then we have to collect firewood because we don't have any gas or kerosene or anything, so it's everything is cooked on a fire. So
Sure.
it's a kind of like basic schedule. So every day it's a same, take care of your siblings because my mom and dad will go work in a field, and then I started going to school when I was like age of 6, and I did went to school for like 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
And school life over there is a pretty simple as well, because no one really care where you're going and what kind of homework you are doing, and the teacher don't teach. I mean, teacher will definitely check your homework, and if you're not done homework properly, they will beat you really badly. So if we
Oh,
don't finish our homework, we'll try to avoid going to school that day.
sure. I can
And
see why. Yeah.
like, yeah, next day we'll go there, and or next few days, and then we'll just tell them, oh, we got sick or something. So,
Jeez.
but
Geez, so
parents
Everett,
and
Everett, so sorry. Everest seems like a vacation for you, apparently, right? It's just like, wow.
yeah, parents and teachers don't have any communication or anything. I mean, nowadays things have changed a little bit, but there is no communication. And like our family, it's not wealthy family, so we kind of work day to day. My parents actually work day to day to kind of put a food on table, and
Hmm.
they don't even, I mean, basically they have to buy like a cooking oil, salt and pepper. Those are the things, and they're having hard time to kind of arrange those things. So it, and then we don't have like a houses. We don't have it's like a room, separate room for all these kids. So all these seven, eight siblings will all sleep together, and so
Wow.
it's a totally different one. I mean, if I tell my daughter today that story, and she say, "Well, that's your time." I mean, so we don't do that now. So
Yeah.
I don't think those kind of lifestyle will come back in the future for people. Yeah.
Yeah. So somewhere along the lines, though, you ended up finding an interest in mountaineering. It sounds like. So where did that come from? Was that because you were around it so much, or the more you learned about it, the more you got interested in it? What was kind of behind that?
Well, those are the later in the days that, when I was studying in the eighth grade, I ran away from village with one of my friend because my parents are not able to afford me to like pay for the school. I mean, it's a government school and there is not much a fee, but they will have some kind of program once on every few days, and it's a required few rupees there, and my family not able to send that money, so it's kind of shame for me to go to school and not join those kind of programs like the tours or anything. So I ran away with this friend and I went to Namche Bazaar, which is a gateway to Mount Everest and where you see all these climbers coming through. And I work in this tea house where lots of climbers are staying, and then I kind of see them with nice boot. I mean, when you wear the climbing boot, you are like almost 4 or 5 inch taller than your regular size. So they look tall and they're nice dress up and big backpack and all these things. And it's kind of like inspired me in that way, but I don't have any clue like how I'm gonna end up in this industry.
Right.
But then I work with a few friends and kind of helped through those things and took some climbing training, and eventually in 2001, 2004, I got a chance to climb Everest. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and it's there's a climbing company that owned by my the uncle. He's passed away, but he gave me a chance to get into this industry.
Pam,
Wow.
you have to share your first job. Uh, well, actually, I think it was your second job as a kitchen boy in order to make your way up to a porter.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the kitchen boys jobs are it's not that easy. It's a kitchen boy is the one that collect all the dishes and wash them and walk in front of the team members, and then again you spread all this kitchen equipment and cook meals, and then you have to make a meal ready before your clients are getting there. So
Wow.
this if you do that kind of job for 1 or 2 years, you will be really well trained for Everest, because this is really kind of like difficult, and you have to run really fast to make that job happen,
Yeah.
because you have to wake up in a 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning, cook breakfast for all these clients, and then you have to pack everything, go ahead of them, and then make a lunch for them, and then pack everything and go ahead of them and make a dinner for them. So
Sure.
that's one of the toughest job, and I started that job earlier, and then that's kind of helped me
Yeah.
get into the shape as well, I think. Yeah. And it's along the way you take a training and courses. I mean, it's a back days like before 2000. I think all these climbers are more like they will come and just pick you up, like, or if you have any connection, they will just say, okay, they will look if they are like strong enough, 5'8" kind of tall, and they will just pick you for the climbing. But after
Mm,
2000, lots of expedition required training and things like that.
yeah. Because my follow up question would be, how do you know that you're ready to take on a challenge like that? I mean, it's obviously it's the largest mountain in the world. So was there a time where either where you were in your training, or was there an experience that happened where you're like, okay, I'm ready to take this on?
Well, it's interestingly for Sherpas, these are not all require, like whether you're ready to take this expedition or you are ready to go, because it's a more like a one is that it's a more obligation. You have to do it for survivor, or you have to make money or living. If you want to
Hmm.
get a better living in the future, you have to climb Everest, or the Everest is the one that you get more money, you make like decent money than any other industry. And Sherpas are the minority group in Nepal, and even you have a really good education, you don't get a government job easily. And so 90% of the Sherpas are end up either in a trekking industry or climbing industry in order to survive their life.
Yeah.
So and then most of the Sherpas there who are interested to climb Everest, they will make a connection with some guide or some the expedition operator, and they actually go with literally they take like a case of beer or red level or whatever you can afford to buy, and then they will go to their house and beg for the expedition.
Really?
And some of them will give you, some of them will don't. But you have to leave that beer and the whiskey there, and then you hopefully, and then you keep following up in their company, and then hopefully you get that job in a few
Yeah.
months. And sometimes you don't.
So what you're saying is it was more of a case of survival rather than trying to be ready for it or not. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you whether you're ready or not, you have to do it. And
Yeah.
then just getting that job is a so big deal. I mean,
Yeah.
no one will even they have a like I mean some of the Sherpas that they have a tuberculosis and they're taking medication and they know that they cannot do it, and but it's still if they get that Everest climbing job they will take it because they don't care
Yeah.
whether they're going to survive or not, but they want to make that money and take care of the family. So it's a more like an obligation, I think, than the
Yeah.
entertainment. But nowadays, the younger climbers are taking more like a adventure and more like a profession, and things are getting a little better.
Okay.
But overall, I think used to be just you have to do it, otherwise there is no other job or
Yeah.
anything. Yeah.
Corinne, what was it like to cover that type of or a story like that where it's like because something I had read about you is you were kind of fascinated with like survival stories and things like that. So was that kind of a type of is that what kind of a drew you into covering Pem's story is kind of it was like this a case of almost survival in a different country and yeah what was it that drew you to it I guess what was it like to
Yeah,
cover
yeah, I think it was in part the story. I mean, as a writer, always interested in, how people overcome incredible odds, and that was part of it. Part of it was that I had read some of those, epic stories about climbing Everest, and as a student of literature, I just realized that there's so little about Sherpas in the huge canon of climbing literature. And then, Pem is just so charming, and that was part of it too. And once I started meeting more of the people that he worked with and his families, both Moni's family and his families, it just became so clear that this was one of those stories that deserved to be told and ought to be represented in the canon of literature. So it was kind of a combination of things, but mostly I think how did this person survive was so interesting. How did he
yeah
get out to the degree he did and thrive? And also just sort of the mystery for me of Everest. Like I didn't I fought with myself because one of the things that Pem and I discussed in order to write this book was that I would have to go to Everest Base Camp with him or up to the Khumbu Icefall.
right cool
And, and and I I never quite understood why people would climb Everest. Your body is
sure
dying. The cells in your body are dying every step you take. I'm like, what is this about? So part of it was, that inquisitive nature I have. Like, I got to go see this. I got to see why people do this. And I really didn't get it until Pem, when you can't see Everest at all until you're up past Camp 2. But he took us up to Kalapatar, and we had this one day where the clouds parted and we could just see the peak of Everest. And then in that moment, it was that moment of
interesting
awe. And I said, I get it. I still don't want to go, but I get
mm,
it. I get why people would really, want to try that, on some level. But the other part that was really wrenching for me was the idea that we're asking Sherpas to take so much risk with us doing that, carrying our stuff, carrying probably a lot of stuff that we don't even need on
yeah
these trips, and just and that was just going to base camp, but never mind going up to 29,000 feet. It just feels like such a great impact, and I got interested in that part of the story too, and
yeah
so those were kind of a combination of things that attracted me to the story.
so that was very smart by Pem to get you in the actual environment to see exactly everything that's going on there. The do you feel like you're I don't know if you were writing the book at the time that you ended up seeing Everest, but do you feel like that really influenced the story of your book more since when you were started to be inspired by actually seeing it, or do you think it was like an overall positive thing for the book?
Yeah, I would say so because it's unless you go there, it's so hard to understand. Even watching, the Netflix movies or YouTube, you don't get the whole picture. You have to be there and you have to understand how hard it is. When I was at actually, it was Namche, I think, Pam, when I had a little bit of altitude sickness and I was saying some things that were a little wacky, and and so you have to experience that, and you have to experience how hard it is to breathe in order
Sure.
to understand that. But I would say, yeah, seeing Everest and watching the people, and we even saw a woman who I think she died, and she didn't even make it to base camp, and so to understand the culture, it was really important to go to Everest and then to see it, to see the awe. I think
Mm-hmm.
that was a big factor with the book, and it's a character. Everest is a character. The whole mountain, the Khumbu Icefall is a character. The Death Zone is a character, and so I think being there and being in the presence of Everest and those who honor it, the Sherpas who honor it, did become a big part of the book and the process.
Yeah, mad respect to you for going there. I think I think that's really cool. I thought
Thank
it's
you.
probably was a little bit scary, but I think that is really cool that not only writing a book about Everest, but you're actually, you're going there, you're seeing it, you're experiencing some of the things that people are experiencing that you're going to be writing about. So I think kudos to you for
Thank you.
following through on that invitation. So one part of the book, or a pretty good part of the book, is focused on I'd want to say it's more almost like a forbidden love story, right? And so this, can you guys tell us a little bit about, this love story, which is great. That it's great that, every story, it's awesome that a story has a love story like this in there, because all the story, you watch Disney movies, you didn't watch all this stuff, right? And all that type of thing. And they always have this, right? But I do think it really draws in emotions really well. And I think that a lot of people can, if they can't relate to climbing up Everest, maybe they can relate to a story like this one. So can you guys kind of elaborate without giving away too much, without, people got to read the book to find out more, but can you elaborate a little bit on this love story and what was making it forbidden in a way?
Go ahead, Pam. I'll let you try it first.
Okay. Well, it's I Moni and I am from different ethnic group, different religion. Moni is a Hindu and I'm a Buddhist, and she is from the city of Kathmandu. I'm from village, and she had a college education in Bangkok and all these things. So, but we met in one of this climbing training, and we become a good friend, fell in love, and then but life goes on. But I don't think Moni and I can able to get married or anything in Kathmandu because our parents will not accept our relation.
Mm-hmm.
And these are typical people, when they not accept, they don't talk to anyone at all. Like, and then we even like during the same time I applied to come to USA, and there's some a huge trend that people will come to US and work here, and then hopefully more able to come here. Maybe we can settle here. And I did went to interview, and then they reject my visa and things like that. But then suddenly there is a Rotary Club of Nepal are celebrating 100-year anniversary, and they pick us to climb Everest. And then Moni and I kind of decided, well, maybe if we able to get to the summit together, we'll exchange our wedding vows, and this will be something new and cool. Maybe our parents will accept. And we kind of keep all the details secret. Even we didn't tell our one climbing partner, Kami, and because we know
Wow.
that if somehow that information leak and her family find out, I think they
Wow.
will not send Moni with us.
Mm-hmm.
Moni on an expedition. So we keep everything secret, and then luckily we both able to get to the summit, and we exchange our wedding vows. Yeah.
That is like a yeah, like the mountaineering Romeo and Juliet, right? Yeah. So what was that like to write about for you, Corinne? Like did you kind of find yourself fascinated with that kind of story of hey, we're going to try to beat the odds here and we're going to try to be creative about this and see what we can do? Like what was that like to kind of bring that into light with a story for you?
Well, I admit I'm a sucker for a good love story, but what
Nice.
what um, what came into play was the hardship that Pem experienced growing up, and the the kind of hardship that might have befallen them, um, making this choice. And
Mm,
so it became part of the theme of the book. You know, I mean, Moni wasn't able to marry for love. I mean, she was headed for an arranged marriage based on her cultural tradition, and so what she would potentially give up in order to make that choice to me was fascinating. And I don't
yeah.
think you find a lot of women necessarily in Nepal who felt they had the power to do that, or maybe even the self esteem, but mostly the power. And so I was fascinated by that, and I was also intrigued by what Moni was trying to um, do differently in her culture, what she was trying to change, but also the tension between that and what she wasn't able or willing to change. There were there were certain things that she was willing to do and certain things she wasn't based on her own traditions and culture. So,
Mm,
I don't want to give it away in the book, but hopefully the reader will kind of sense some of that Moni's critique of other, women, climbing women, who were also trying to break out, was very different from what she was trying to break out from in her mind, but not necessarily in tradition. The freedoms
mm,
that these women climbers wanted were very similar, but the consequences were great.
mm,
So that was kind of the interesting part. And the other interesting part of the love story is that Pem and Moni had strategically decided to set several different records in order to try to set up a means of immigrating from Nepal. It's really hard to get a visa, as Pem mentioned, out of Nepal. It's almost impossible.
mm,
But they felt that if they could set some records, that might allow them to go have some speaking engagements in other countries, and that might lead them out of Nepal to a job helps and help them economically. So that part of the love story is really intriguing too, and an intricate part of what they were trying to achieve to help their families and their communities, villages, and the country of Nepal itself.
yeah. So it was. So it sounds like it was risky overall to do
Yes.
this. Number one, right? And so it sounds like Moni was kind of had a tension of. So there was the tradition, but she also wanted to have the freedom of choice in a way, type of thing.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Got it. That's incredible. So, what were the records then that you guys set in order to do that?
Well, we were first couple to married on summit of Mount Everest, and
Mm,
it's an interesting part is that it become a catch lots of media attention and everything, and then we luckily able to come to US, and we apply for like extraordinary visa, which is we climb Everest and and then we got a green card and become a citizen. So yeah, that did really help to
it
make
did
things
really help.
happen. Yeah, yeah,
Cool.
And the other record, so you were trying to set the record of the first couple to marry
first,
at Everest, first Nuwari woman to summit,
yeah.
and
Mm,
and then for the Rotary of Nepal, if they had summited, it would bring um, the possibility of the Rotary to have their own established Rotary in Nepal versus sharing the Rotary with India. So there are several things that they were trying to achieve. And they also had $100,000 sponsorship with Canon, the camera company.
Really?
And but they had to take pictures at the top in order to receive that money. So there are just some interesting dynamics about getting there and achieving the summit.
That had to be stressful to try and keep those batteries warm enough to take pictures at the summit. What was that like, Pem? Because
Well,
I would be stressing out if it was 100 grand.
it's actually we had a same accident. We had a camera. We put one battery on the camera and one battery in my pocket inside my
Mm-hmm.
jacket.
Mm-hmm.
And on the top, we are trying to take a picture, and then battery is dead. And then
Oh my
same time,
God.
I forgot that I have an extra battery in my pocket. So we couldn't use the Canon camera on the summit. That's an interesting part. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And
Oh,
yeah, because when you get to the summit, I mean, when you're on that
sure.
altitude, you're gonna lose most of your memory cells, and
That's true.
yeah, yeah,
That's a good point. Yeah. You don't even, yeah, remember that it's there.
yeah.
Wow. Okay.
I came back to Camp 4 and I took my jacket off, and here is a extra battery in my jacket. So
Wow.
And there's also that added risk of staying at the summit longer than they should
yeah,
in order
Mm,
to have this first world record or first record of
yeah.
marriage at the top because it impacts them
right.
descending.
Yeah. So overall, very risky, but it sounds like the reward was worth it.
That's yeah. Reward is
Yeah.
worth it. Yeah,
It was definitely worth it.
definitely. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. So
Thank you.
this would be a question for both of you guys, but like how does the book, because a lot of the book is going to be about like wanting to probably address some of the common misconceptions about Sherpas and then their lives beyond climbing. So how does the book attempt to address that, or can you bring up some examples of maybe things in the book where it does that?
Well, sure. I think when oftentimes people think Sherpa is a noun, that Sherpas are porters. They basically carry climbers' gear up to Everest. And we would hear that occasionally in conversations. And so we took some time in the book to talk about Sherpas being an ethnic group, often from Tibet, and Pem's family has emigrated from Tibet. And I think one of the others, and then Pem, I'll let you add to this, is that people believe that Sherpas will keep them safe, must keep them safe, and are incredibly loyal to their clients, which they are to a degree. But I think that they, in the recent past, they're becoming more vocal about when it's time to say no, when it's turn around to
That's
honor
good.
their own safety versus just doing what the client says because they're getting paid for it. But there is that expectation that the Sherpas will always keep them safe, and it doesn't always happen. And I think the other part of that misconception is that people think that if they're fit, they can go summit Everest, and that's not always true. Sometimes the body just will shut down, even if you're the most fit
Mm-hmm.
person in the world. So those are a couple. Pam, do you want to add to that some of the misconceptions about Sherpas?
Well, it's the first thing is it's right now it's a much there is a lots of documentaries and media coverage and social media that lots of people will know about Sherpas, but lots of people often talk to me here even now say think that Sherpas are the porter on a Mount Everest, and but Sherpas is actually ethnic group, and at the same time they can be any profession. And other thing is that uh, lots of time that Sherpas are really athlete and then climbing Everest they are strong and all these things they kind of people will put that way, but I think 90% of Sherpas are doing that and showing that strength because they have to do it because it's obligation, because if they are not showing their strength or they are not strong enough, then they lose their job. And as a Sherpa myself, I mean, we hiked through the Everest and then climbing through this ice wall, and like 10, 15 people in a group. I mean, some of the Sherpa literally vomit blood. You know, they split blood while they are walking there, but they don't really tell anybody because they think that they're going to be weak, considered weak, and they don't get the job next time.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there are 1 or 2% of Sherpas, they give up and leave the climbing sense and they never come back. But most of them, they push themselves just because they have to do it. There is no other job. They have to take care of their family. So this is just to like get a financial gain or something. They otherwise their physically is really challenging even for Sherpas. I mean, it doesn't mean they don't feel any pain or any problem on the mountain.
Right. They're
But
not robots up there.
they are not robots. They are suffering extremely, and working so hard. Yeah.
What is another job that a Sherpa might have besides mountaineering? Is there another common job that Sherpas have?
Well, beside mountaineering, they are doing trekking guide,
Mm.
and then lots of them are farmer up on the mountain. But nowadays,
Mm.
some of them, if you go around New York or California or Colorado, lots of Sherpas are here working different profession,
Oh, really?
and most of them is still in the Nepals are either climbers or trekking guide or farmer. Yeah, and few people working for government, but it's really rare. Yeah.
Yeah, Corinne, you bring up a good point of we talked about it earlier in the podcast too of how people expect Sherpas to kind of be is their safety net, is going to protect them from everything type of thing. And I think it's the same thing here in the States as well. When you hire a guide to do a mountaineering objective like a Mount Baker, Mount Rainier, or something like that. And I think that people will come in, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, and I would love to know if you had any experience with this, Pem, but people probably come in a little, like I said, and again, we talked about this earlier, but a little too overconfident and a little too overzealous with getting that summit. Is how does that affect like their decision making going forward on the mountain? Have you seen any personal accounts of that, Pem, when you were taking people up there at all, or can you recall anything, any examples? And kind of why I'm asking the question is for anybody that might be listening that wants to go over there. These are things you should probably know before you want to be prepared with and know before you ultimately go up there, because like you were saying, Corinne, they might be fit, but that ain't what's going to exactly take it to the top. Yeah. So Pem, can you think of any examples where maybe you were with somebody that was real overzealous, you guys got in a dangerous situation, or any examples like that?
Well, there are, I mean, whenever we take a group of people together, there is always the jealousy and issue and whether they get to the top before one another, or that's a typical things in a human nature. I mean, every individual group that I led is people don't get along. Huh. One of them have issue with other person. I mean, not technically each other, but there are someone says, I don't like this guy. Maybe I'm gonna walk ahead of this guy, or I'm gonna stay behind this guy. And then when even they go to summit, I'm like, I don't feel like I want to go with this guy to summit. I want to go separately. So these are common issue that faced by the guide or Sherpas on Everest. And then same time, all these people who come to climb Everest are a little crazy. I mean, technically, they spend all that $1 million and then they come to die. Maybe it's almost like
right.
They have a little bit of different mindset than the average person, I think. So right. They're always trying to push themselves or trying to do something a little more crazier than average normal people. And then we, as a Sherpa, think that's normal because we kind of seeing those people every day. So we just listen them and say, okay, we'll try, we'll give a try, something like that. But they try to push beyond their limits sometimes. Like, okay, let's do this. Let's go from here, camp 2 to camp 4 without using oxygen, or let's go from here to here. So they do always trying to challenge themselves.
Well, that's a famous quote by Krakauer, right? Into thin air, where you guys could probably quote this better than I can, but the overall gist of it is you need a certain mentality to summit Everest, but that same mentality can get you killed, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would also add that even though, Pam, it doesn't sound like you had that client who put you at risk necessarily in the couple times you climbed, but there are other climbers who put you at risk. For example, when you went to when you got the call that a climber had fallen, so you and Kami went up to see if you could help. And trying to get a body out of a crevasse and down the mountain is extremely dangerous. So it's not, sometimes it's not just your clients, but it's also you as Sherpa
Mm-hmm.
communities who go together to help somebody who has fallen or is injured and trying to bring them down. That also is risky business.
Right, yeah. I mean, so it's once you are on an expedition there, it's not just your client or your climbing team. It's a risk for you. It's surrounding other people that goes with you, or on along the way you see them also put you on a risk sometime, because if there is only one rope set up all the way to the summit, and if the person head of us kind of is stuck on that rope, they will push everybody behind on a line and not able to
Right.
cross. So you probably seen some of the picture that 30 people, 40 people on a one line. That's because
Mm-hmm.
the person in front of you is not moving enough, like faster, and then you cannot really do anything. You just, literally have to wait some time. I mean, so it's a depend on where the location is. I mean, sometimes we can go front and cross him, but some of the time that you don't have access to cross those places, and
Yeah.
you literally is stuck there. Yeah.
And I think that's an important point, because if you're ignorant, your ignorance might not only get yourself killed, but also other people killed in the process, because you're jamming up lines, you're making them rescue you, or all this type of stuff. And I think that's really important for people to know before getting involved into an expedition like this, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. I mean, yeah, if they're able to figure out what's are the things happening with their body, and that might be really good. But sometimes people, when they get to that altitude, they don't really realize what's happening with them,
Yeah.
and so it's most people use it's a sometime. I mean, people spend lots of money, so they have to make it to the summit, and they do have a big pressure from their sponsor or other people that
Right.
arrange that expedition. So they
Yeah.
it's a huge it's a really hard decision for them to whether continue climbing up or coming down, because if something happened. But for Sherpas is another really pressure, because if they're not able to make it this season, they
Exactly.
can go back next time. But this person who paid that much money need to make it on that time. Otherwise, he couldn't able to manage the money to come back next time. So
Yeah, it's a
they
really
they have
interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because the folks that you're guiding up there essentially are there for a to tick off a goal in some sense for the most part, whereas the Sherpas are there to tick off the survival box, versus the goal box, which is just kind of two different. It could be two different mindsets there. Yeah.
Right, yeah. Sherpa's part is not the making to the summit is not a big push, because they're more into like making expedition safer and then successful summit, but not push and kill yourself to the summit, because
Exactly.
you always have a next summit. I mean, you see the Sherpa climb 30 times, 35 times, it doesn't make huge difference. But client made a one summit, they will have a more publicity, more
Sure.
movies, more videos, and things like that. So,
Totally. Totally.
yeah.
So, Corinne, was it hard to tell the story of another person? Or what did your writing process look like for this? I mean, it sounds like you visited Nepal and the Kumo, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. We'll just say the Icefall, Everest Base Camp, and things like that to kind of get even more background and things. But what? Tell me about the difficulty of attempting to tell a story of another person. What's that like?
Well, it was an interesting process that involved lots of revision and lots of going back and forth with Pem and Moni and Kami and talking about their stories. Um, and I'll start by saying I had an agent in New York, and he loved the writing, loved the story, but he wanted me to write my personal story, with Pam and my personal story in Nepal. But that wasn't the story that I wanted to tell or that I felt needed to be in the canon of climbing literature. And I also Pem and I talked about ghostwriting it and trying to write the book in Pem's voice. And we decided together that Pem's goal was to have as many people read this story as possible to reach a larger audience, particularly North American audience. And so we decided to write it in my voice, more of a biographical portrait of Pem. And there were times when um, part of the difficulty was the cultural difference, of course, the way that um, Nepalis, Sherpas, Nuwari women tell their stories and what they tell. So Pem, for example, his family is not, their culture is not big on talking about personal stories. Pem thought, well, this is just everybody's family is like this. Everybody's family gets beaten and has to live day to day, in trying to make enough money to put food on the table or to farm enough to put food on the table. And so it was hard for us to kind of figure out that right voice and the right way and the right things, the right stories to tell, and how to tell them. And another example is that Pem told this great story of first meeting Moni and described her, like she was a movie star. And culturally, for Moni, that was a little bit too risque. It felt too she felt too vulnerable using that story, which, in my opinion, it felt, wow, this is really it's a direct quote from Pam, and it was beautifully written. And so there was a lot of navigating what's appropriate in Nepali culture and what's appropriate in the American culture and the audience, but also knowing that Pem and Moni are Americans now, right? So they're
Right.
bicultural. And so
Interesting.
how do you blend that, and how do you hold their their hopes and dreams and their stories in a way that honors their culture, both in Nepal and here? And because they have to go back and interact with their families. And there was a lot of discussion about depression for women in Nepal. Women have so many children in order to work the farms in the villages, and there's very little health care. And whether it's postpartum depression or just depression from all the pressure, there's a lot of suicide, and that has struck Pem's family in a way. And so we had lots of conversations about how do we talk about that? Is it appropriate? Like in America, we'd say, oh yeah, you just tell the whole story and from you know very intimately, and it's not so in Nepal. So there were those kinds of things to navigate, and I think that added to the length of time it took to write the book. And the other thing is that their storytelling is not traditional, like American storytelling. And and so we needed to find that right way to talk about their stories. And for Pem and Moni too, I learned the stories in segments. So I get part of the story first, and then a year later, Pem would say, "Oh, by the way," and then I'm like, "What?"
Nice. Yeah,
and,
sure.
and so I think it was good that we took our time because we teased out all of the depth of the stories that were there
Yeah.
and figured out how to tell them. And then Pem and Moni would read the scenes and the stories and say, could we adjust this? It just feels a little too vulnerable, or yes, it's okay to be this vulnerable in this particular scene.
Yep.
So it sort of took a lot of back and forth and really thinking about um, what is the most honorable way to share the story and the most authentic way so that people could see how Moni and Pam live their lives. not just an academic story about Hinduism or Buddhism, because they had
Mm,
such mixed beliefs. And sometimes Pem wasn't sure why they practiced a certain tradition. So then he would ask his parents, and his parents didn't understand why he wanted to know that and thought I was a crazy person for asking these questions.
right,
So it was just kind of interesting drawing these stories out, and
right.
it took a lot of time and patience to be, and willingness to really do it well and do it as well as we could. And we could have gone another year or two and it would have been a different book, but it had its energy, and it felt like it was time to get it out there in the world.
Yeah, that sounds, yeah. I imagine it's way different than just writing a story about yourself or something like that. But with this type of story, it's like, you're right. You got to corroborate with this person, make sure these details are right, make sure they're comfortable with it. Culturally, they're comfortable with it too. But how is it still going to resonate with if people are reading from America and overseas, right? Like, very big challenge. Wow. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
kudos to you guys for putting that
Thank,
together. Yeah, I
thank
mean,
you.
that is a big deal. So I think that's a really good spot to really have you guys plug the book. So it's called Beyond Everest: One Sherpa's Summit and Hope for Nepal, and looks like it came out back in September of this year, right?
Early October.
October.
Early October, okay. Early October. So it's fresh out, right? You can get it
Yes.
on Amazon, you can get it wherever you guys want. But do you guys have any parting comments of to readers to kind of get them to maybe excited to read a book like this?
Go ahead, Pam.
Well, I think if anybody like to read a more like a Sherpa adventure story kind of things, I think this book would be great.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's a more like a life story kind of things. Yeah.
Yeah, so especially if you want to learn more about the Sherpa way of life, sounds like.
Way of life, yeah. Sherpa way of life, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then climbing Everest, yeah.
yeah. I think if you really want to know what it's like for uh, the inside scoop on Sherpas climbing Everest, this is a great book. And if you love stories like I do, it's a really interesting one. And I think it would be fun to put yourself, for any reader to put themselves in the shoes of Moni and Pem and say, "Whoa, would I have made that choice?" And
Mm,
so why? Um, and and I think it's also I I feel like we're in some hard times right now, and it's a book of hope. How do you climb out of a really difficult situation, and maintain a level of hope, and giving back for Pem has been, and for myself as well, has been part of that sense of creating hope. Educating girls. Pem has brought elevated his village, and they now have electricity and running water, and so it's a great way to really experience a different culture, and get to know it, and if you get a chance to go to Nepal, I hope readers would, based on
yeah.
what they read in this book.
Yeah, it sounds very inspiring for someone to, like, I've always wanted to get over to Nepal, never had. I'd love to do Everest one day. I get maybe. Well, I don't know. You read, like I said, you read some of those books, you're like, kind of like you, Corinne. I haven't seen it in person, so I'm kind of like, I don't know. How do I feel about this death zone type of thing here, right?
Yeah.
Maybe Denali would be cool, I think, in North America, but yeah.
Well, Chet,
So
I highly encourage you to take Pem as your guide. He is an incredible guide.
on which one, Denali or Everest?
Either.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, I would love to, man. That way we can write our own book then too. We can
Yeah.
write another one. We can write the
That's
sequel.
right. That's right, yeah. Well, once you done the Denali, then it will push you to Everest.
Yeah, because obviously on Denali they don't have Sherpas,
Yeah.
so you got to carry your 100-pound pack and all that type of thing. And I can only imagine what Everest would be like if that was the case as well, trying to do it there and you didn't have any Sherpa help. I mean, it would be just an incredibly arduous task. I mean, so.
Well, and one last plug for Pem as a guide. He knows so many people in Nepal, and
Yeah.
he's treated a little bit like royalty because he's famous, and so
Oh, really?
he's had a couple of clients get sick, and boom, he's gotten them out and safe. And
Yeah.
oh yeah, you need a helicopter. Oh, there's Pam. He's got the helicopter there.
No way.
It's pretty remarkable. Yeah.
He's a rock star.
Okay.
Need a doctor? Okay, doctor's there in 2 hours.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Well, before we go, guys, how can they? We already kind of talked about the book title, Beyond Everest: One Sherpa's Summit and Hope for Nepal. Where can they find more about each one of you guys at? We can start with you, Corinne.
You can look at my website on CorinneRichardson.com and learn a little bit more about me. And my Facebook account, and you can see what I'm up to on Instagram, other adventures that I'm working on. I'm a sea captain and
I saw that.
take a boat to Alaska every summer.
Right. I was like, what? Nice.
So you can follow some of my photographs and adventures, and yeah, that's about it.
What about you, Pam?
Well, I've been doing guiding most of my life, and I still doing some, and then raise the two children here in US, and that's kind of keep me busy now. So,
Okay.
but
Now,
I may go do some climbing in the future, more bigger climbing. We'll see.
where do you do guiding at though?
We lead a trip mostly to like Bhutan, Tibet, or Nepal.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I've been trying to do Kilimanjaro, but I tried once and it didn't work much. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I feel like, is that kind of more one that people start with if they're trying to do the 7 summits?
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems like
It's
a common one.
it's not that difficult. It's easier, but
Right.
it's lots of up and down,
Sure.
but
And
it's
Pam, you
not
have
that
some
bad.
great website pages too, if people want to find more
Yeah.
about you. And
That's right. Yeah. Our company is called Imperial Expedition. If anyone interested to visit, yeah. So,
Awesome. Well, I'll link all this stuff in the show notes for everyone. So thank you guys so much for
thank you,
coming
Jared.
on.
I really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
well, thank you so much for having us. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'll quit the recording right